Welcome back. The death penalty made headlines this week after a Florida jury decided against imposing it on the Parkland shooter. But there are equally important stories happening every week involving the age-old punishment and this country's complicated relationship with it. Those don't always make the headlines. And joining me to discuss is Chris Geidner, author of Law Dork and a journalist who's done some deep reporting on the death penalty over the years. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Katie.
Well, let's start with the Parkland case. We saw a decision out of the jury. It requires a unanimous jury to impose the death penalty. They didn't get that. What did you make of the Parkland jury's decision? And more than that, the media's coverage of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important when we talk about the death penalty, particularly, I mean, you're already starting from a situation where a lot of states no longer impose the death penalty by law. And then on top of that, a lot of states that even have the death penalty aren't executing people, either by gubernatorial action or just by virtue of sort of where they're at in the process. Then on top of that, you have what happened this week with Parkland, where even in a state where they have the death penalty, where they are executing people when people reach that point in their appeals, the juries are oftentimes, even in extreme cases like this, not choosing to impose the death penalty. And that is notable, especially when it really comes down to, at this point, the few states and the few counties even within those states where the death penalty is even a real possibility.
There are many off-ramps, as you mentioned, that are both procedural, even political, from both the federal and the state level, but it still happens. We still kill people as a part of the criminal justice system in this country. And in your reporting, you talk about how race is a disproportionate factor in those who end up on death row. And I want to make sure I get this right, but in your reporting, I believe you said since 1970, 295 Black defendants were executed for killing a white victim, and 21 white defendants were executed for killing a Black victim, even though Black people are disproportionately victims of crime. How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it happens when you have an extremely individualized system. It is sort of the end result of federalism in a way, because not only do you have the fact that state laws control where the death penalty can be sought, but you also have the fact that individual prosecutors within those states are deciding whether or not to seek the death penalty, let alone whether or not a jury is going to impose it. And so you have, I mean, when you think about the idea of like, if there's a possibility of bias within the system, you have that sort of you have several levels of that coming out possibly within the death penalty, because you have sort of at each level, if there is racism in the system, like it could come out. And when you have a normal prosecution that like a lot of people aren't paying attention to, you basically have like the prosecutor decides whether to do it and the jury decides whether they're guilty.
Right.
But in the death penalty, you have sort of all of these steps along the way that are sort of both high cost, metaphorically and literally, because it's so expensive both to seek the death penalty and to impose it, that you sort of see the extreme outliers of those possibilities and the ways that race imbues itself into our system through the death penalty.
This is a political consideration. We hear about it on the campaign trail from governors and from presidents. Biden talked about it on the campaign trail. Just quickly at the end here, where does the Biden administration come down?
Well, that you'd need to ask them, Katie. Candidate Biden said that he opposed the death penalty, and that their criminal justice plan was to do all that they could to end the death penalty. But just recently, in the past month, the Biden administration, Merrick Garland, did decide to go forward with a death case, that they are going to be trying to seek the death penalty, and that's in the New York, the Halloween bike trail murder,
Right, out of New York.
where the guy drove the car along the bike trail.
Right. Well, we're getting mixed messages from the Biden administration, as you point out. And of course, there's always an invitation for him to join us to help explain exactly where his position is. As you said, I should ask him. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us and helping explain this complicated history, our history with it, and this complicated issue. Chris Geidner with Law Dork. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.